Your finger slips. You hit send. A split second later, your blood runs cold. You meant to send the ultrasound of your unborn baby to your sister, but you typed one digit wrong. For Sophie Mercer, that one wrong digit didn't connect her to a stranger. It connected her to Lorenzo Moretti, the most ruthless capo in the Chicago underworld. She panicked and typed, "Sorry, wrong number." But the reply she got back wasn't confusion. It was a promise. The phone dinged, and 3 words flashed on the screen that would burn down her entire world. "That's my child. Buckle up. This isn't a fairy tale. This is a war." The rain in Chicago didn't wash things clean. It just made the grit slicker. Sophie Mercer sat on the edge of her bathtub, the porcelain cold against her thighs, staring at the grainy black and white image in her trembling hand. It looked like a storm cloud, or a bean, or a mistake, but the doctor at Mercy Hospital had been very clear. 6 weeks. She was 24, a waitress at a diner that smelled perpetually of burnt bacon, and she was entirely alone. The father, it had to be Liam. It had to be. Even though they had broken up 2 months ago, the timeline was murky. Or, God no. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the memory of that one night in the high-end hotel bar, the night she'd felt so broken, she let a stranger in a charcoal suit buy her a drink. She never got his name. She just remembered his eyes dark, like oil spills, and the way he touched her like she was made of glass that he intended to shatter. "Pull yourself together, Soph," she whispered. She needed to tell someone. Not Liam. Not yet. He was probably halfway to Florida with that new girl. She needed Clara. Her sister would scream, then cry, then tell her exactly how they were going to fix this. Sophie grabbed her phone. Her hands were shaking so bad she fumbled the contact list. She decided to just type the number in. She knew Clara's new work cell by heart, or she thought she did. 312-555-0198. She snapped a photo of the ultrasound. No caption needed, just the image. Send. She dropped the phone on the bath mat and put her head in her hands. The silence of her tiny, drafty apartment felt heavy. It was done. The secret was out. Ping! That was fast. Clara must have been on her break. Sophie picked up the phone expecting a string of question marks or emojis. Instead, the screen showed a message from a number she didn't save. Known. "Where are you?" Sophie frowned. She looked at the number she had texted. 312-555-0199. Her stomach dropped. She'd hit a 9 instead of an 8. "Sophie, I am so sorry. Wrong number. Please delete that." She held her breath. A simple mistake. People did it all the time. Ping. Unknown. "I asked you a question. Where are you?" A shiver unrelated to the drafty window crawled up her spine. The tone was aggressive, possessive. "Sophie, look, I made a mistake. I'm blocking this number." "Goodbye." She went to tap. Block. But the next message came through so fast it froze her thumb mid-air. Unknown, the timeline matches. The Omni Hotel, October 14th, room 404. Sophie stopped breathing. The phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the tiles. October 14th. The Omni Hotel. The man in the charcoal suit. She scrambled to pick up the phone, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. How could this random wrong number know that unless she hadn't texted a random number? She had texted him. The stranger. The man she had slept with in a fog of heartbreak and whiskey. Unknown, don't run. If you run, I will hunt you down. That is my child. Sophie gasped, backing away from the phone as if it were a bomb. That is my child. She grabbed her coat. She didn't know who this man was, but the authority in those texts terrified her. She needed to leave. Now. She grabbed her keys and ran for the door. She threw open the peeling white door of her apartment and screamed. Blocking the hallway were two men. They were massive, dressed in suits that cost more than her entire building, and between them stood a man who looked like he had been carved out of marble and nightmares. He lowered his phone, his dark eyes, those oil spill eyes, locking onto hers. Lorenzo Enzo Moretti didn't smile. He stepped over the threshold, forcing her back into her own apartment. "Hello, Sophie," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. "We need to talk about our future." Lorenzo Moretti hated loose ends. In his world, a loose end was a noose waiting to be tied. As the underboss of the Moretti crime family, he spent his days managing logistics, laundering money through legitimate real estate, and ensuring that bodies stayed buried in the foundations of the skyscrapers he built. He was in the middle of a meeting with the heads of the unions at his penthouse office when his private line buzzed. Only 5 people had that number: his brother, his consigliere, and his top 3 capos. He checked the screen, annoyed at the interruption. An image, an ultrasound. He stared at it. At first he thought it was a threat, a message from the Russians, perhaps implying they knew about his family. But then he saw the timestamp on the ultrasound, gestational age 6 weeks. He did the math instantly. He was a man of numbers after all. 6 weeks ago, the night of the gala at the Omni, he had been celebrating the acquisition of the Port Authority contracts. He had gone to the bar to escape the sycophants, and he had met her. Blonde hair that looked like spun gold, sad eyes that looked like they'd seen too much rain. She hadn't known who he was. To her, he wasn't Enzo the Butcher. He was just a man. It was the first time in 10 years he had felt human. He had left before she woke up, leaving a stack of cash on the nightstand, not as payment, but because he knew she was struggling. He had seen the worn soles of her shoes. He had regretted leaving her ever since. He had even had his men look for her, but Sophie was a common name, and he had practically nothing else to go on. And now here she was, dropping into his lap via a typo. When he texted back asserting the child was his, it wasn't just intuition, it was a strategic necessity. His father, the Don, was dying. The Vesperi family was circling like sharks, waiting for a sign of weakness. Enzo needed to solidify his claim to the throne. An heir, a legacy, would secure his position against his younger, reckless brother, Dante. But when he stood in the doorway of her shabby apartment in Cicero and saw the fear in her eyes, strategy went out the window. She looked thinner than he remembered. She was wearing a faded, oversized sweater, her hands trembling as she clutched her keys. "Who are you?" she whispered, backing up until her legs hit the back of her ugly plaid sofa. Enzo signaled his men, Rocco and Silas, to stay by the door. He closed it gently, shutting out the prying eyes of the neighbors. "Lorenzo Moretti," he said, taking a slow step forward. "But you can call me Enzo." Moretti. The color drained from her face. Even civilians in Chicago knew that name. It was synonymous with dead bodies and expensive concrete. "Oh my God, I made a mistake. The baby. It might not be yours. I have an ex. Liam. It's probably his." Enzo stopped. He looked at her stomach, then back to her eyes. "Liam is a bartender at the Green Mill. He has low motility. His chances of conceiving are less than 5%. I ran a background check on everyone in your life the moment you sent that text, Sophie." Sophie's mouth fell open. You checked my ex's sperm count in 5 minutes." "I have resources," Enzo said dismissively, "and I don't leave things to chance. The timeline fits us. The Omni fits us. It was one night, she argued, her voice rising in panic. I don't know you. You can't just walk in here. I can, he interrupted, his voice dropping an octave. Because you are carrying a Moretti. And Morettis do not grow up in... He gestured vaguely at the peeling wallpaper and the water stain on the ceiling. This is my home. She snapped, a spark of anger cutting through her fear. Not anymore. Enzo checked his watch. You have 10 minutes to pack a bag. Essentials only. I'll buy you everything else. I'm not going with you. Enzo closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He towered over her, smelling of sandalwood and gun oil. He reached out his large hand, hovering near her cheek but not touching it. The air between them crackled. Sophie, listen to me very carefully, he said softly. You sent that picture on an unencrypted line. If I found you this fast, my enemies will find you by dinner time. The Vespri family would love nothing more than to extinguish my bloodline before it draws its first breath. Sophie stared at him, her chest heaving. Enzo, are you saying someone wants to kill my baby? I'm saying, Enzo said, his eyes hard as flint, that as of this moment you are the most dangerous target in Chicago. You can stay here and pray, or you can come with me and live. Choose. She looked at the door where the 2 giants stood guard. She looked at her phone on the floor. She looked at her stomach. She didn't know this man, but the steel in his voice made her believe him. 10 minutes, she whispered. Enzo nodded, a muscle in his jaw ticking. Rocco, help her pack. As Sophie rushed to her bedroom, Enzo turned to the window, pulling out his phone. He dialed his head of security. It's confirmed, Enzo said into the phone. Prep the safe house and find this Liam character. Pay him to disappear. If he doesn't take the money, handle it. He hung up. He hadn't told her the whole truth. He didn't just want to protect the baby. He wanted her. He had tasted peace that night at the Omni, and he was a man who took what he wanted. He was going to make Sophie Mercer his wife, whether she wanted it or not. The drive to the Moretti estate was silent. Sophie sat in the back of the armored SUV, watching the city blur past. The transition was stark from the grey potholed streets of Cicero to the iron gates and manicured lawns of Lake Forest. Enzo sat next to her, typing furiously on a tablet. He hadn't spoken a word since they left her apartment. The distance between them on the leather seat felt like a canyon, yet the heat radiating from him was suffocating. Is this a kidnapping? Sophie asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was small but steady. Enzo didn't look up. It's protective custody. Does the custody usually involve armed guards and no choice? He finally turned to her. The interior lights of the car cast shadows across his sharp cheekbones. In my world, Sophie choice is a luxury. Safety is a necessity. You have the latter. Stop worrying about the former. The car crunched over gravel and came to a halt in front of a sprawling limestone mansion. It looked like a museum, cold and imposing. Welcome home, Enzo said. This isn't my home, Sophie muttered as the door was opened for her. It is for the next 7 months, at minimum. They entered the foyer, which was dominated by a massive crystal chandelier and a double staircase. A severe-looking woman in a housekeeper's uniform was waiting. This is Marta, Enzo said. She will show you to your quarters. I have business to attend to. Dinner is at 8. Do not be late. He turned to leave, but Sophie reached out and grabbed his arm. The contact shocked them both. His muscles were rock-hard beneath the suit jacket. Enzo, she said. He froze, looking down at her hand on his sleeve. Why are you really doing this? Is it just the baby, or is there something you aren't telling me? Enzo looked at her hand, then up into her eyes. For a second, the mask slipped. She saw something raw there, hunger perhaps, or desperation. "My father is dying," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "When he passes, a war will start for control of the city. A man with a family is seen as stable. A man with an heir is seen as strong. You are not just carrying a child, Sophie. You are carrying my crown." He gently pulled his arm away. "Rest. You look pale." He walked away toward the library, leaving Sophie standing alone in the massive hall. She felt like a chess piece that had just been moved across the board, completely unaware of the game being played. Upstairs, her room was larger than her entire apartment. A four-poster bed, a balcony overlooking the lake, a walk-in closet already filled with clothes in her size. It was terrifyingly efficient. She walked to the balcony doors and tried to open them. Locked. She tried the window. Locked. She went to the door she entered through. It opened, but when she stepped into the hall, a large man in a dark suit nodded at her from a chair 10 feet away. "Everything okay, Miss Mercer?" "Just checking," she said, retreating back into the room. She was a prisoner in a silk tower. Sophie paced the room. She wasn't going to just sit here and be a broodmare for a mob boss. She needed leverage. She needed to know what was really going on. She remembered Enzo's words. "The Vesperi family would love to extinguish my bloodline. If she was a target, she needed to know who was hunting her." She waited until the house was quiet. At 7:45 p.m., she slipped out of her room. The guard was gone, likely on a shift change or bathroom break. She had 5 minutes. She tiptoed down the hallway, avoiding the creaky floorboards. She knew where Enzo had gone. The library. The heavy oak doors were slightly ajar. She could hear voices inside. "It's a risk, Enzo," a rough voice said. "That must be Rocco. If Dante finds out the timeline is fuzzy, if he finds out you didn't actually confirm paternity with a DNA test yet." Sophie froze. He didn't know. Enzo's voice cut through the air, sharp and cold. "It doesn't matter, Rocco. I feel it. It's mine, and even if it isn't, I will make it mine. Sophie is the key. The Commission loves a family man. By the time the baby is born, I will be done. And if the kid comes out looking like that bartender, we'll deal with it then." "And the girl?" Rocco asked. "Once the baby is born, what happens to her?" There was a long silence. Sophie pressed her ear to the crack in the door, her heart pounding so hard she thought they'd hear it. "She is the mother of my child," Enzo said finally. "She stays, but she plays by my rules. If she tries to leave, make sure she understands that she leaves alone. The child stays with the Morettis." Sophie clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. He would take her baby. She backed away, horror flooding her veins. He didn't care about her. He didn't even know for sure if the baby was his. He was using her to become the Don. And once he had what he wanted, he would trap her here forever, or kick her out without her child. She turned to run back to her room, but she collided with a hard chest. "Listening at doors is a bad habit, Sophie." She looked up. It wasn't Enzo. It was a man who looked like a younger, crueler version of him. He had a scar running through his left eyebrow, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Dante," he said, gripping her upper arm painfully. "Enzo's brother, and you must be the golden goose." Dante leaned in, whispering in her ear, smelling of alcohol and expensive cologne. "My brother thinks he's so smart, but I know a lie when I see one. You and I are going to have a little chat." "Let go of me," Sophie hissed, trying to pull away. "Dante!" Enzo's voice boomed from the library doorway. He stood there, his face a mask of fury, a Glock suddenly in his hand at his side. "Take your hands off her," Enzo commanded, raising the gun. "Now!" Dante laughed, releasing Sophie and holding his hands up in mock surrender. "Easy, brother. Just welcoming the new family member. She's pretty. A bit jumpy, though." Dante winked at Sophie. "We'll talk later, sweetheart." He sauntered past Enzo, whistling a tune. Enzo watched him go, then holstered his weapon and turned his gaze to Sophie. He knew she had been listening. "Dinner is served," he said coldly. "Come." Sophie looked at the man who claimed to be her protector and the hallway where his brother the wolf had just disappeared. She realized then that she wasn't just in a gilded cage. She was in a shark tank, and the only way to survive was to become a shark herself. The following week was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Sophie didn't try to run again. She knew the perimeter was impenetrable. Instead, she observed. She learned the guard rotation. Silas took his coffee black at 4 a.m. Rocco had a bad left knee that slowed him down on stairs. She learned that Enzo spent his nights in the library drinking amber liquid that smelled like peat and smoke, staring at blueprints of the city. She also learned that being the fiancé of a capo meant being put on display. "Wear this," Enzo said on a Thursday evening, tossing a garment bag onto her bed. Sophie unzipped it. A gown of blood-red silk spilled out. It was backless with a neckline that plunged dangerously low. It was a weapon in the form of a dress. "The commission is meeting at the Lyric Opera House tonight," Enzo said, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked devastatingly handsome in a tuxedo, a fact that annoyed Sophie to no end. "My father will be there. He wants to meet the woman carrying his grandchild." "And if I tell him the truth?" Sophie challenged, holding the dress against her body. "That you're holding me hostage, that you don't even know if the baby is yours." Enzo walked over to her. He didn't touch her, but he leaned in close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. "My father is a dying man, Sophie. He values legacy above all else. If you tell him the truth, he won't save you. He'll simply have you eliminated and cut the baby out to raise it himself. I am the kind option." Sophie shivered. The cold pragmatism in his eyes was terrifying, because she knew it was true. The Lyric Opera House was a sea of diamonds' furs and shark smiles. As they walked up the grand staircase, flashbulbs popped. Enzo's hand was a warm, possessive weight on the small of her back. "Smile," he whispered against her ear. "You're happy. You're in love. You're carrying the future king of Chicago." Sophie forced a smile that felt brittle enough to crack. "I hate you," she whispered back, beaming at a photographer. "The night is young," Enzo replied smoothly. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Sophie could feel eyes on her, calculating, hungry eyes. Dante was there holding court near the bar, watching them with a sneer. But the real danger was the man sitting in a wheelchair in the private box, Don Vittorio Moretti. He was a skeleton of a man hooked up to an oxygen tank, but his eyes were sharp. He beckoned Sophie over with a withered hand. "Come closer, Cara," the Don rasped. He placed a cold hand on her stomach. Sophie flinched but held her ground. A boy. It must be a boy. "We'll find out soon," Sophie said, her voice trembling slightly. "Enzo tells me you met at the Omni," the Don said, looking up at his son. "Romantic. He never was one for romance. Always business." "Sophie is different," Enzo said. His voice sounded surprisingly sincere. "She makes me want to build something that lasts." Sophie looked at him surprised. For a second, she wondered if he was acting, or if the lines between the lie and the truth were blurring. Suddenly the glass of champagne in Sophie's hand shattered. At first she thought she had squeezed it too hard. Then she saw the red mist on the wall behind her. Then she heard the crack. Sniper. "Down!" Enzo roared. He tackled her to the floor just as a second bullet pulverized the chair she had been standing next to. Chaos erupted. Screams, shattering glass, the stampede of wealthy bodies in panic. Enzo was on top of her, shielding her body with his own. He pulled a gun from his waistband. How had he gotten that past security and fired blindly over the balcony railing? "Rocco, get the Don!" Enzo shouted into his lapel mic. "Silas, cover the exit, we're moving." He hauled Sophie to her feet. "Run! Do not let go of my hand!" They sprinted through the panicked crowd. Sophie lost a shoe, but didn't stop. They burst through the kitchen doors, startling the staff. Enzo kicked the back exit open, dragging her into the freezing Chicago alleyway. "Who was that?" Sophie gasped, her lungs burning. "Vesperi!" Enzo growled, scanning the rooftops. "They aren't waiting for my father to die. They're starting the war now." A black sedan screeched around the corner. The window rolled down, and the barrel of a submachine gun emerged. Enzo shoved Sophie behind a dumpster, just as the alley lit up with muzzle flashes. Bullets chewed up the brickwork inches from her face. Sophie covered her ears and screamed. She heard Enzo return fire, the rhythmic pop, pop, pop of his handgun calm amidst the automatic fire. Then a tire blew out. The sedan swerved and crashed into a lamppost. Enzo didn't wait to check the wreckage. He grabbed Sophie's arm. "We can't go back to the estate. They'll be waiting. We have to go underground." He looked at her, his eyes wild adrenaline pumping through him. There was a smear of blood on his cheek. Not his. "Are you hit?" He demanded, his hands frantically checking her arms, her waist. "No, I'm okay," Sophie stammered. Enzo let out a breath that sounded like a groan. Then he did something unexpected. He grabbed her face in both hands and kissed her hard on the forehead. "Good," he whispered, "because if they had scratched you, I would have burned this city to ash." For the first time, Sophie didn't pull away. In the chaos, in the violence, he was the only steady thing in the world. They drove north for 3 hours in a borrowed car, a beat-up Honda Civic Enzo had hot-wired with surprising proficiency. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a cold, aching silence. They arrived at a hunting cabin near the Wisconsin border deep in the night. It was rustic, dusty, and freezing. Enzo got the generator running and lit a fire in the stone hearth while Sophie sat on the rug, wrapping herself in a moth-eaten blanket. "There's food in the pantry." "Canned goods," Enzo said, walking back into the room. He was limping. Sophie looked down. His pant leg was soaked in blood. "You're shot," she said, scrambling up. "Just a graze." Enzo grunted, collapsing onto the leather armchair. The bullet went through the fleshy part of the thigh. Missed the artery. "You need a doctor." "I can't call anyone, not yet. I don't know who gave up our position at the Opera House. That was an inside job, Sophie. Only the family knew we would be in that specific box." Sophie stared at him. "You think it's Dante. Dante is reckless, but he's not stupid. Killing me at a public event brings too much heat. This feels personal." Enzo winced, trying to tie a tourniquet with his belt. His hands, usually so steady, were shaking from blood loss. "Let me," Sophie said. She knelt between his legs. She had no medical training, but she had worked double shifts on her feet for 6 years. She knew how to handle pain. She ripped the expensive tuxedo pant leg open. The wound was ugly, a gash through the muscle, oozing dark red blood. "This needs stitches," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "There's a kit in the bathroom. Vodka on the shelf." The next hour was a blur of agony. Sophie cleaned the wound with vodka. Enzo drank half the bottle. She poured the rest on his leg and stitched him up with a needle and thread meant for fishing. Enzo didn't scream, but he gripped the arms of the chair so hard the leather cracked. When it was done, she bandaged it and sat back on her heels exhausted. Her hands were covered in his blood. Enzo looked down at her. The pain had stripped away his arrogance. He looked human, vulnerable. "Why did you help me?" he asked softly. "You could have let me bleed out. You could have taken the car and run." "I don't know," Sophie admitted. She looked at the fire. "Maybe because you took a bullet for me, or maybe because I'm terrified of being alone out here." Enzo reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her jaw. "You're not alone, Sophie. I told you. You're mine." "Because of the baby," she said bitterly. "At first," he conceded. "But tonight, when the shooting started, I didn't think about the heir. I didn't think about the legacy. I just thought about you. I couldn't let the light go out of your eyes." The air in the cabin shifted. It wasn't just fear and cold anymore. It was something heavier. Sophie leaned into his touch, her resistance crumbling under the weight of the trauma they shared. "Enzo," she whispered. He pulled her up. She settled carefully onto his lap, mindful of his leg. He kissed her, and it wasn't like the performance at the opera. It was desperate tasting of vodka and smoke. Sophie kissed him back, her hands tangling in his hair. For a moment, they weren't a waitress and a mob boss. They were two survivors clinging to each other in the dark. The next morning, the sun was blinding on the snow. Sophie woke up in the armchair wrapped in Enzo's tuxedo jacket. Enzo was already awake, sitting by the window, his phone in hand. He looked grim. "What is it?" Sophie asked, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "The results came back," Enzo said, holding up the phone. "The paternity test." Sophie's heart stopped. She had almost forgotten. The reality of her life came crashing back. And Enzo turned the screen toward her. "Probability of paternity 99.99%. "It's yours," she breathed. "It really is yours." Enzo nodded. But he didn't look triumphant. He looked furious. "That's not all," he said. "My security team did a deep dive on your ex. Liam." "What about him?" "Liam isn't just a bartender, Sophie. His real name is William Vesperi. He's the nephew of the Vesperi Don, the rival family." Sophie felt the room spin. "What? No, that's impossible. We dated for a year. He was sweet. He was broke." "He was a plant," Enzo said ruthlessly. "He was tasked with finding a weakness in my operation. When he couldn't get to me, he dated you to get to my associates who frequented that diner. But he failed. He abandoned you because he was reassigned." Enzo stood up, ignoring the pain in his leg. "And I just got a text from an unknown number. They have him. The Vesperis have Liam." "Why would they tell you that?" "Because," Enzo said, his voice dropping to a terrifying growl. "Liam is the one who told them where we were last night, and now they want to make a trade. A trade for what me, Enzo, said. They want me to come alone to the docks, or they kill Liam." Sophie stared at him. "You're going to let them kill him, aren't you? He betrayed me. He tried to kill us." Enzo looked at her, his eyes unreadable. "No, I'm going to go get him." "Why? Because..." Enzo checked the clip of his gun. "I want the pleasure of killing him myself." The fog rolling off Lake Michigan was thick enough to choke on a swirling grey wall that turned the world into a ghost town. Enzo killed the headlights of the stolen Honda Civic a block away from the Navy Pier shipping yards. The silence in the car was heavier than the humid air outside. Enzo turned to Sophie. In the dim light of the dashboard, his face was pale, the earlier loss of blood taking its toll. But his eyes, those oil-spilled dark eyes, burned with a terrifying resolve. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a snub-nosed .38 revolver. He checked the cylinder, snapped it shut, and placed it heavily into Sophie's hands. "Listen to me," he said, his voice a low rasp. "This is for you. If I'm not back in 15 minutes, you do not come looking for me. You get into the driver's seat, you drive to the 14th District Station, and you ask for Detective Miller. Do you understand?" Sophie looked down at the cold steel in her hands. It felt impossibly heavy. "Enzo, please. This feels wrong. It feels like a setup." "It is a setup," Enzo admitted, a grim smile touching his lips. "But it is the only way to flush them out. If I don't walk into that warehouse, they will keep hunting us. They will hunt you and the baby forever. I have to end this tonight." He leaned in, gripping the back of her neck, and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was searing and desperate, a goodbye disguised as a promise. "Stay in the car. Lock the doors." He opened the door and vanished into the fog. Sophie watched him go, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She checked the time on the dashboard clock. 2:14 a.m. She waited. The seconds stretched into minutes, each tick of the clock amplifying the dread pooling in her stomach. The shipping yard was a graveyard of rusted metal and shipping containers looming like tombstones in the mist. At 2:20 a.m. her phone buzzed. She snatched it up, praying for a text from Enzo saying it was over, but the number was blocked. Unknown. "He looks good on his knees, doesn't he? Come join the party, Sophie. Warehouse 4B, or watch him die." Attached was a grainy photo. It showed Enzo tied to a metal chair in the center of an empty warehouse floor. His head hung low, blood dripping from his temple. A gun was pressed against his jaw. Sophie didn't scream. She didn't cry. A strange, icy calm washed over her, the kind of calm that comes when you have nothing left to lose. She looked at the revolver on her lap. She thought about the baby growing inside her. "Stay in the car," she whispered to herself, repeating Enzo's order. Then she unlocked the door. She wasn't going to drive to the police station. She wasn't going to let the father of her child die alone in a dirty warehouse. She slipped the gun into the deep pocket of her oversized coat, keeping her hand wrapped around the grip. Safety off. Point. Squeeze. She moved through the fog, following the faded numbers painted on the corrugated metal sides of the buildings. 4B. The sliding door was cracked open, spilling a sliver of sickly yellow light onto the wet pavement. Sophie slipped inside. The smell hit her first, a mix of old diesel fish and metallic blood. The space was cavernous shadows, stretching long and distorted against the walls. In the center, under a single flickering halogen bulb, was the scene from the photo. Enzo was conscious, but barely. His left eye was swollen shut. Standing over him, holding a nickel-plated pistol, was a man in a sharp suit. "Dante!" Sophie said, her voice echoing in the vast emptiness. Dante Moretti turned, a cruel smile spreading across his face. He looked so much like Enzo, but where Enzo was marble, Dante was jagged glass. "Ah, the guest of honor," Dante crooned. "I told you she'd come. Women are so sentimental." "Let him go," Sophie demanded, stepping into the light. She kept her hand in her pocket, clutching the gun so hard her knuckles ached. "I can't do that, sweetheart," Dante laughed, circling Enzo's chair. "See, Big Brother here has been hoarding the throne for too long. Papa is dead. The seat is open, and I'm tired of being the runner-up." "So you hired the Vesperis?" Sophie asked, her eyes darting around the shadows. "You sold out your own family to the enemy." "I used the Vesperis," Dante corrected. "Whatever it takes to win. Right, Liam." Sophie's breath hitched. From the shadows behind a stack of crates, a figure emerged. Liam. He looked exactly as he had the last time she saw him, handsome, boyish, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. He looked like the guy who made her pancakes on Sundays. He looked like the guy she had cried over for weeks. "Hey, Soph," Liam said, offering a casual shrug. "Liam." Sophie felt the world tilt on its axis. You're with them." "I'm with the money, babe," Liam said, walking over to stand beside Dante. "Dante offered me a payout that makes a bartender's salary look like pocket lint. All I had to do was get close to you, check if Enzo was really the father. Feed them info." "You never loved me," she whispered. The betrayal hurt worse than any bullet. "I liked you," Liam admitted, tilting his head. "You were fun. But you were a job. And frankly, you're worth more to me right now as leverage." Enzo groaned, lifting his head. Blood coated his teeth. "Sophie, run!" Dante kicked the chair leg, sending a jolt of pain through Enzo. "Quiet you. Now here's the deal, Sophie. You're going to pick up that phone on the table. You're going to record a video statement. You'll say Enzo Moretti kidnapped you. You'll say he forced himself on you. You'll destroy his reputation with the commission." "And if I do?" Sophie asked, her thumb caressing the hammer of the gun in her pocket. "Then Enzo goes to prison or the morgue, I haven't decided, and you walk away." Dante lied. Sophie could see the lie in his eyes. He would never let her walk away. Not with the true air in her belly. "And the baby?" Sophie asked, stalling. She needed to get closer. "Liam says he's willing to step up." Dante smirked. "Raise the kid as a Vesperi Moretti hybrid, a peace treaty in a diaper." Liam grinned. "Come on, Soph. We can make it work." That was the breaking point. The idea of this traitor touching her son, raising him with lies, ignited a fire in Sophie's veins that burned away the fear. "I have a counter-offer," Sophie said, her voice steady hard. Dante raised an eyebrow, amused. "Oh, and what might a waitress offer a king? I offer you." Sophie took a step forward. "Hell." She didn't hesitate. She didn't think. She whipped the revolver out of her pocket. Liam's eyes went wide. "Whoa!" Sophie fired. The sound was deafening, a thunderclap in the enclosed space. She didn't aim for the head. Her hands were shaking too much. She aimed for the center of the mass. The bullet caught Dante in the chest. A bloom of red erupted on his white shirt. The shock on his face was absolute. He staggered back, the nickel-plated pistol falling from his hand with a clatter. "You bitch!" Liam screamed, fumbling for his own weapon tucked in his waistband. Sophie turned the gun on him, but before she could pull the trigger again, a blur of motion erupted from the chair. Enzo. He had been working on the ropes behind his back the entire time, ignoring the pain, waiting for a distraction. The gunshot was his bell. He snapped the loosened ropes, surged upward, and tackled Liam with the force of a freight train. The two men hit the concrete hard. Liam was younger, uninjured, but Enzo was fighting with the primal fury of a man defending his mate. Enzo didn't reach for a gun. He grabbed Liam by the throat, his thumbs digging into the windpipe. Liam thrashed, clawing at Enzo's face, gouging the already bruised skin. But Enzo didn't flinch. "You touched her!" Enzo roared, lifting Liam's head and slamming it back against the concrete floor. Crack. "You sold her crack." Liam's body went limp. Silence rushed back into the warehouse, punctuated only by Enzo's ragged breathing and the soft gurgle coming from Dante. Sophie stood frozen. The gun still raised smoke, curling from the barrel. She looked at Dante. He was slumped against a crate, clutching his chest, pink froth bubbling on his lips. He looked at her, his eyes dimming. "You," Dante wheezed. "You weren't supposed to fight." "I'm a mother," Sophie said, her voice trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. I'll burn the world down for him." Dante's eyes glazed over. His hand fell away from his chest. Enzo stood up, slowly swaying on his feet. He looked at the unconscious Liam, then at his dead brother. He wiped the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand and turned to Sophie. He looked terrifying, blood-soaked, battered a killer. But when he looked at her, his expression crumbled into something raw. "Sophie!" He breathed. She dropped the gun. It clattered loudly on the floor. She ran to him, colliding with his chest. "I told you to stay in the car!" Enzo groaned, wrapping his arms around her so tightly she squeaked. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling her scent, grounding himself. "You're fired from giving orders," she sobbed, holding him up as his knees buckled. "Fair enough," Enzo whispered. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "No." She shook her head, pulling back to inspect his face. "But you look terrible." "I've been better," he admitted, wincing as he shifted his weight. "But the rot is cut out. Dante is gone. The Vespri link is broken." He looked over her shoulder at the body of his brother. There was grief there, buried deep but overshadowed by necessity. In their world, family was everything until family tried to kill you. "Come on," Sophie said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "Let's go home. I'm driving." Enzo leaned his weight on her, limping toward the exit. "To the police station." "No," Sophie said, looking at the dead men behind them. "To the estate. We need to call Rocco. We have a mess to clean up." Enzo looked at her with a mixture of awe and reverence. The waitress was gone. In the forge of that warehouse, amidst the gunfire and the blood, a queen had been tempered. "Yes, Mrs. Moretti," he murmured. "Whatever you say." 7 months later, the nursery did not look like it belonged in a house built on blood and concrete. Located in the east wing of the Lake Forest estate, it was a sanctuary of soft sage greens and creams, bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon sun, reflecting off Lake Michigan. The crib, a masterpiece of hand-carved mahogany that had cradled 3 generations of Moretti men, stood in the center of the room, like a throne. Sophie sat in the plush velvet rocking chair, the rhythm of her movement slow and hypnotic. In her arms lay the reason for the war, the kidnapping and the bullets. Leonardo Leo Vittorio Moretti was only 2 weeks old, but he already possessed the commanding presence of his father. He had a tuft of jet-black hair and eyes that, even when sleepy, seemed to assess the room with a watchful intensity. He was heavy in her arms, solid, real, and safe. The heavy oak door creaked open, breaking the silence. Sophie didn't jump. She didn't reach for a weapon. She knew the cadence of those footsteps by heart now. Enzo walked in. The transformation was complete. The man who entered the room wasn't just a capo or an underboss anymore. He was the Don. His father had passed peacefully in his sleep 3 months prior, just weeks after the incident at the warehouse. Enzo wore the mantle of power like a second skin. He was dressed in a bespoke black 3-piece suit, the cut sharp enough to draw blood, a mourning pin still on his lapel. He moved silently across the plush rug, the slight limp from the bullet wound in his thigh, the only physical reminder of the night they burned their enemies to the ground. "Is he sleeping?" Enzo asked, his voice a low rumble that instantly soothed the baby. "Fighting it," Sophie whispered, smiling down at her son. "He has your stubbornness and your appetite." Enzo knelt beside the chair, the fabric of his expensive trousers stretching over his knees. He didn't care about the suit. He reached out a large, scarred hand and gently brushed his knuckles against the baby's cheek. Leo stirred his tiny hand instinctively, grasping Enzo's index finger. "He is strong," Enzo murmured, a look of profound reverence softening the hard lines of his face. "The commission is downstairs, Sophie. The heads of the 5 families. They are waiting to pay their respects to the new heir." "Let them wait," Sophie said fiercely. "He's eating." Enzo chuckled, a rare, genuine sound that he saved only for this room. "You are the only person in Chicago who dares to make the 5 families wait." "I'm the mother of the king," Sophie teased, though there was a steeliness to her voice now. She wasn't the waitress from the diner anymore. She was a woman who had pulled a trigger to save her family. Enzo's expression turned serious. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. "Sophie," he said, his dark eyes locking onto hers, "we started this backward. I kidnapped you before I courted you. I fought a war for you before I even asked if you wanted to stay." He popped the box open. Inside sat a ring that made the room's chandelier look dim. It was a massive yellow diamond, flanked by rubies the colors of the Moretti crest. It was antique, heavy with history, and absolutely breathtaking. "My father gave this to my mother," Enzo said. "It is not just a ring, it is a promise. It means that you are the heart of this house. You are the only thing that keeps me from becoming the monster they think I am." He took a breath, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "I don't want you to stay because of the baby. I don't want you to stay because you are afraid of what's outside those gates. I want you to stay because you love me." Sophie looked at the ring, then at the man holding it. She thought about the drafty apartment in Cicero. She thought about Liam's betrayal. And then she looked at Enzo, the man who had taken a bullet for her, the man who had burned down half the city to ensure her son was born safely. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was darker, messier, and infinitely more real. "I blocked Liam's number a long time ago, Enzo," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "You're the only number in my contacts now." Enzo smiled, the tension leaving his shoulders. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her for decades. "Good." He leaned in, kissing her softly, careful not to disturb Leo. "Because if you tried to leave, I'd just have to hunt you down again." "I know," she replied, resting her forehead against his. "That's why I love you." Enzo stood up, offering her his hand. "Come. The wolves are waiting downstairs. It is time they met the Queen." Sophie adjusted Leo in her arms, stood up and took her husband's hand. She caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror, the diamonds on her finger, the fierce set of her jaw, the powerful man at her side. She wasn't Sophie the waitress anymore. She was Sophie Moretti. They walked out of the nursery, leaving the door open. Down the hall, the low hum of the gathered mob bosses drifted up the stairs. But Sophie wasn't afraid. She tightened her grip on Enzo's hand. It started with a typo. It ended with an empire. And that is the story of how a wrong number created a dynasty. Sophie went from serving coffee to ruling Chicago, all because she hit a 9 instead of an 8. It proves that sometimes fate doesn't knock it texts. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of Mafia romance, betrayal and redemption, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. And tell me in the comments, if you sent a wrong number text to a Mafia boss, would you run or would you reply, "Thanks for watching," and I'll see you in the next video.